In this video, we're going to go over the different ways to install the Fabric tool onto our system. There's three main ways to install the tool. You can download and run the binaries. You can build the tool using go install, and you can also clone the repo. If you wanted to change some of the source code and make some other alterations, or if you wanted to run the GUIs that come with the repo, you would need to clone the repo down to your system. And then you can build it and also build and run some of the other tools. In this video, only because there's a couple nuanced further steps that you can do with installing the binaries. In this video, we're going to stick to just the binaries. So how we do that, if you were in the repo, let's say we started out cleanly in the top of the Fabric repository, you would scroll down, and to jump down where we needed to go, installation and get the latest releases. In Ubuntu, you're most likely going to be the Linux platform. You have Windows, macOS, and Linux. With Ubuntu, a modern installation of Ubuntu, you're most likely, I think, going to have the AMD architecture. You'd have to double check. I don't know, you could probably run something like, neofetch or fastfetch if you had those installed. And we're going to go over a bunch of those helper tools in a later video. I know my system requires this install script. Now, I keep calling these bash install scripts. Obviously, that'd be PowerShell. If you're on macOS, you're probably running the Z shell. And by default, on an Ubuntu installation, you're going to be running the bash shell. So that's why I call them all bash shells. I'm misspeaking when I do that, and I do it all the time. So I would put that into the terminal and run it. And when it's done, we can just list the contents of our directory. We would see that we have the Fabric tool installed right here. To try and run that, let's say we just try to pull up the help menu. We'll see that, even though the Fabric tool, the file is right in front of us, we can't use it. And so to actually directly call it, we have to type / and then Fabric. And then we can run it as we like, as per usual. Pulling up the help menu is all we're going to be doing. It's not super useful, but we're just demonstrating installing the binary onto our system. There's a couple different ways to make this normally useful. We can leave the Fabric file in our home directory, which if you become a terminal user, that's not really a good option because your home folder will fill up wicked fast. Believe me, if you saw my real system, even in an effort to keep the home file cleaned up, you still kind of have to scroll when you list the contents of my home directory. This demo system, this newbie demo system that I set up, it's not quite the case. There's still a few things here that I've installed, just messing around and building. But this isn't even a lot. And you can imagine where every single thing that you're doing gets installed to your home directory. This thing just gets unwieldy. You want to really, you want to move this somewhere else eventually. And we'll get into that. But first, we need to make this tool useful. And assuming you're going to not be a terminal user or power user, and you're going to leave the file right here in the home directory, we want to at least make this tool normally usable, meaning that you can just type Fabric and then the rest of the command or whatever command that you want to run. So to do that, we need to make an alias. The instructions in the repo are very, basic and straightforward. It says to put an alias in your bashrc. If we go into the bashrc, I'm a Vim user. I know the forever battle of Vim and Nano and all that. And there's also, your Ubuntu system comes with a built-in text editor. Its default text editor is the GNOME text editor. You'll find it if you go into your application list and you would scroll through and find it. And I've already just pinned it to the taskbar here, or to the dock, sorry. So if I wanted to run that, let's say I want to run the text editor, I could press open, the bashrc, you can go searching through your file system for it. It would be in the, whatever your username is for the login account, that's also the name of the home folder, really. And you can also find it here in home, the user directory home name, they're the same thing. We could scroll down and just find our bashrc, list your their dot directories first, and those are things that you can turn on and off. But if we wanted to open our bashrc, we can get into it, and I'm going to use the GNOME text editor as far as I can remember to through these videos. There's going to be times where without thinking I'm going to jump into Vim or NeoVim or Micro or something else or other. I'm going to do it without thinking about it, and so I apologize in advance for that. I'm going to try and remember to use the GNOME text editor. Honestly, it's not that bad. I actually can set up Vim key bindings in it and use it as I would use Vim. So at any rate, you'll notice in this file, in this bashrc file, if you scroll down, they created some aliases for you. It's why if you've ever used grep or the ls command and you typed ll and you have colored output and these things, the reason you automatically have that in Ubuntu as opposed to, say, if you built an Arch is because the Ubuntu people, they built out a bashrc for you and they gave you some aliases. And you'll also notice here that they have this little block right here where it says that, if you're making a lot of aliases, and if you become a terminal user, you're going to start building and making a lot of aliases, and they're going to constantly change and evolve. And so they recommend that so that you're not in here bumping around in all this code, bash code and scripting that they've done for you, where you can accidentally make changes, especially if you're not using Vim. They recommend that you use a bash aliases file to put your aliases into, and that way when you're constantly changing them, you're going into your bash aliases file and not into this bashrc, where it gets a little bit more, the contents of it are a little more, they evolve less, they change less, generally speaking. That's true. For the sake of the first step here, what we're going to do is we are going to follow the instructions that I'm pretty sure I had seen in the repo somewhere, and we're just going to pop an alias in here to make this tool usable. If you're never going to be changing things, if you're never going to be adding a lot of aliases for whatever reason, then I guess it's strictly speaking is definitely okay. I mean, it's your system and your files. You can do whatever you like. But for the sake of simplicity, we will put the Fabric alias in here just to make the tool immediately normally usable. And to do that, we would type alias Fabric, and then we would alias it to the location. And now we don't just put in /fabric like we have to do with the command line. That would work if you were in your home directory. But if you go anywhere else in your file system and try to use this alias like this, it's going to look in the directory that you're in for the Fabric tool. That's what the // is doing. This alias would only work immediately in the home directory. It won't work. It's not going to find the Fabric tool anywhere else. So what you have to do is you have to type in, you can put in the absolute path, which is the /home, and this gets a little confusing because your home folder is actually all of this /home/newbie. That's actually your home folder. This home is another directory, and believe me, if you're confused, just take it like this, like you have to accept facts of reality, like you need air. You don't argue it. It's just the way it is. You don't know why you have to have air. You don't know why you're made that way. You got to take some of these things like that. They're not facts of reality. They're man-made facts, but take it like a fact of reality. It's a fact of your system. The sooner you accept it, the sooner you're going to process it and move on, and then you're going to learn the why. You're not just going to know, you're going to understand. So this is the full path, the absolute path to the Fabric tool. One of the ways that you can shorten this, you can just type the tilde sign, what they call path expansion. The tilde sign means the user's home folder. So /home/ whatever your username is, that's your user home directory, and that's what the tilde represents. You're also going to see in a lot of places this thing right here, $home, and that's because your home variable in your bash environment is the same as tilde. It's the same as /home/ whatever your username is. And when you try to insert that into any sort of bash scripting or terminal commands, things like that, you insert it by using the $sign and then the environment variable of home. So there's a couple weird things that just seem confusing at first. Believe me, once you process them, they become a thing from a long time ago. I wrapped my head around that. And I know that you're not going to wrap your head around it immediately if you've never seen this before. But I have to bring that up. So back to the task at hand, this is what we have to do. We have to put, if we want to be in any any location in our file system within the terminal and find the Fabric command, which resides in the home directory right now, and we want to call it up as we would normally call up any tool, we have to put in either the absolute path of the Fabric tool, or with path expansion, we have to put in the tildes, just what they use. It's how they designed it. So we would put in tilde/Fabric. We have to save and quit out of this. And then we can start running. And now, granted, we do have to source our bash shell. And we do that. Sorry, I had caps on. We do that by typing source bashrc. What that does, and I have this little base thing coming up. That's a conda environment thing for versioning of Python and some other languages and environments. Don't worry about that. I have that turned off, but when I source bash, all that stuff happens. Now, we should be able to call up the Fabric tool directly. This is the menu. And if we went into a different directory and tried to call up the Fabric tool, it should work. That might have gone too fast for eyes to see. So now we can use it wherever we are in our file system, even though the tool resides here in the home directory, in the user's home directory. The Fabric tool still sits right here. It was installed and made executable automatically by that bash install script. So this is how you get that thing working without moving it. Now, the next thing that you can do for a more nuanced installation would be leaving the tool right here, not moving it anywhere else, and following the recommendations in that bashrc. Clear the screen up. So going into the bashrc, if we come over here and open our text editor, the bashrc, it holds it in memory. That's how the GNOME text editor works. We're going to get rid of this alias, and we're going to follow the instructions here, where we want to insert our aliases into a .bash aliases file. So we eliminated that, and we're going to save it, and we'll get out. And you see that right off the bat, we don't have bash aliases. So Ubuntu doesn't give us a .bash aliases file. We see that if you understood that code that was in there, the bashrc is looking for the bash aliases file. Now, here's a couple important things that happen. Your .pro file has some code in it that looks for a bashrc, and if it finds it, it calls it up. And the bashrc, likewise, looks for a bash aliases, and if it finds it, it calls it up. Those things are preset. If we look at that real quick, this is the .pro file, and in this file, just real fast, it looks for bash, a version of bash, and if it finds it, then it's going to look for a bashrc in the user's home directory. That's where that $home pops up for the first time that we see it, that I mentioned earlier. Now, this little phrase right here, this is a conditional. So if bashrc exists and this returns as true or false, if it returns as true, then it's going to call up with this little dot right here. Yeah, there's dots everywhere, right? This is the same as sourcing it. If it finds a bashrc, if that condition returns true, then it's going to call up its instructions. Another thing that .profile does, that we'll talk about in a little bit, is looking for a bin and a .local bin, and that's for the even more nuanced installation of the binary. So going into bash, in the same way that the .profile looks for the bashrc, the bashrc looks for the bash aliases. If this condition returns true, then it's going to source and call up the instructions in bash aliases. But there is no bash aliases, so we need to make it. Now, you can make a file. One of the basic ways to do it in the terminal is to touch it. This also modifies it, or when you touch it without actually changing anything, you just update the modification dates. Like all these dates right here is last modified, and if for some system reasons you need to update the latest mod time of your file, you just touch the file. But if the file doesn't exist, the touch command will make that file. And so we can use touch and then .bash aliases. Real quick, .files and .folders, just make them hidden. Now, we ran the touch command on bash aliases. For a little bit, I'll keep using the ls command because it's what comes with the system. So we created the bash aliases file, and it sits there empty. You can see right here, there's nothing in it. So we want to go into that and add an alias. So you can go to the doc or into the apps listings and find the GNOME text editor. You can also type GNOME text editor. It's good to know how to do it. And then you can also alias this, which I'll show you in a second to make this way faster. So we're going to go in and edit our bash aliases file. Oh, you got to spell text editor correctly. So now that we're into our bash aliases file, you can just start typing aliases in, or you could give a little header here to comment out and not throw error codes. You type a pound or hash, whatever you call it, and that will comment out that line. And so we're just going to put additional aliases. We'll come down and we can put in the Fabric alias that we want to use. For now, it's going to be with using path expansions, the tilde to indicate our user's home directory, and then Fabric. And now that alias is going to work again, the one that we just took out of our bashrc. We could also run an alias GNOME text editor. I put in GTE equals GNOME text editor. Save this and quit out. Now we have to source that bashrc to make those aliases immediately useful. You can also close your terminal window and start it back up. But if we source the bash aliases file, now we should be able to use the Fabric command without // again. We should be able to type GTE instead of GNOME text editor. Let's try the GTE, and it opens it up to the last open file. Consequently, we conveniently have the 3 files that we need to work with to do a more nuanced installation than we have so far. So now we still have, I'll try and remember to use the ls command for the remainder of this. We still have the Fabric tool in our home directory, which I personally don't like, but we've created a bash aliases file to store aliases in without having to fill up our bashrc and mix our ever-changing and ever-evolving aliases in with and next to a bunch of code that generally remains more static and is very delicate or fragile, in that if you, with an accidental keystroke, mess something up in there, believe me, I've done it. So that's one further step to the install of the binaries. It's a further nuanced step that we took creating the bash aliases. Now, another thing we could do is, we could make a directory to store all kinds of things like this Fabric tool, to get it out of our home directory and into some, collection type of directory. And then we could change the alias that's in bash aliases. We could change that to reflect the new location of the Fabric tool. But the thing is, if you're going that far, you might as well do the full Monty here, Let's install the Fabric tool into our path and then be able to call it up without aliases. Call it up like you would any other system tool. And it's really easy. And it's really, really easy in Ubuntu. If we go into our GNOME text editor, we have a chain of events that happens. When our terminal spins up the bash shell, it runs .profile, then it runs the bashrc, and then the bashrc looks for the bash aliases, and if it finds it, it runs that, right? It has the shell run that. Well, of these 3 files, everything starts with the profile, your .profile. After it looks for bash, and if bash is returned as a true condition, then it looks for the bashrc, and if that condition returns true, it runs the bashrc. Then, on down here, this is what's interesting now, real quick, for this ultimately nuanced install of the binary. What the .profile does is it looks for the existence of a bin directory in the user's home directory. Now, again, this $home, this also means /home/ the username, in our case, newbie, /bin. If it finds it, this next instruction inserts that bin folder. And now from here on out, because it gets exhausting, when I say bin and .local bin, I mean as relative to the user's home directory. There's a bin in various other places. And I'm not talking about when I say just bin and .local bin, I'm talking relative to the user home directory. I won't bring that up again because it's exhausting. What the .profile does is it checks for the existence of a bin, and if that returns true, then it's going to insert the bin directory into your system's path so that any binaries or executables that reside in the bin are callable by your system no matter where you are in your file system inside the terminal. No matter where you are, you can call it up like you would any other tool, not having to type ./, not having to use aliases of any sort to call it up. Likewise, because of modern conventions and things like that, it also looks for .local bin. And now I know I'm saying it wrong. It's just what I say. It's .local /bin. It's technically /home/ the username .local/bin. It's .local bin. When I say .local bin, that's what I mean. I'm not going to bring that one up again. So it checks for the existence of a .local bin. If that condition returns true, then it's going to insert .local bin into your system's path so that any binaries or executables that are in .local bin are now callable from wherever you might be in your system without an alias and without // or any of that stuff. So this is what your .profile does. And so using that, what we can do is let's check for the existence of those folders. And they, by default, they don't exist. There is no bin. We can cd into .local, which does exist, and we can look around. And if you're looking for folders and files, we have to do the -L and also the A. Inside of .local, there's only share and state. There is no .local bin. Likewise, in the home directory, there is no bin. And so that's pretty easy. Just like we had to touch the bash aliases file, the way that we create a directory is just the make dir command. So we'll make dir bin. Now we have the bin folder. So we go back, we just type cd, go back to our user's home directory, and we'll make dir the bin. Now we have those. So what we do now is we can go in and we just move the Fabric tool into either one of those. Either one works because of the .profile. Now there are conventions. Apparently it's in an effort to not junk up the user home directory. It's become a modern convention to use .local bin. And there's a lot of things that use .local bin. I still use bin off the user's home directory. I use that plenty. I don't mind having that directory there because the directory helps clean up a bunch of stuff just floating around in terms of files. So that doesn't bother me. You can put it in either one. Just know that after we put it into one of them, let's say that we follow conventions and we move the Fabric tool to .local bin. To do that in the terminal, we would type mv for move Fabric, and then we would move it to .local bin, and it'll move the Fabric tool so we can run ls-l. I should be doing that ls-la. The Fabric tool is gone, and to verify that we did that right, we can cd into .local bin. If you went one step at a time, you type cd.local, and when you get in there, you type cd space bin, or you can just do it in one step. And now the Fabric tool is in here. Now to make that usable anywhere in your system, so if we ran Fabric right now, can't find it again. We move the tool. We have to source our .profile. Now when you source the .profile, it's going to also source the bashrc, which will also source the bash aliases file. Just clean the screen up, and I got rid of that prepended base to the terminal prompt here. It's a conda environment thing. I don't want to confuse you, so I'm just getting rid of it. We can take a look in our home directory here. The Fabric tool is not here. We can go into our bash aliases. Now, if we tried to run this alias, the Fabric tool is no longer in the home directory. This would have to use an alias here, this would have to be changed to .local bin like this. But to obviate this, to make this completely unnecessary, we are putting it into the .local bin, and we source the .profile, which is going to search for, again, having sourced it, it's going to search for bin and .local bin. We'll just save that. We'll keep our GTE GNOME text editor alias. We'll save that, so there's no longer an alias to the Fabric tool anywhere. Let's see if we did that right. No. So sometimes you just have to exit out after just shutting down the terminal and starting to back up. Now you can see that the Fabric tool is not in here. If we were to go into Ranger, which is a tool we're going to get very used to, you can see that inside, this is the user's home directory that I'm scrolling up and down in. We can go over into the bin. Now the bin exists because we made it. There's bin, share, and state, and inside of bin is the Fabric tool. That's where it resides. It's not in our home folder. And because of creating the bin and .local bin, and because of .profile, putting those things, once it finds them, inserting those directories into path, now the Fabric tool is callable no matter where we are in our system, without any aliases or anything like that. That's how that works. Clear our screen. So that's how you do a more nuanced install. The most nuanced install of the Fabric binary is inserting it, first creating bin and or .local bin, then putting the Fabric tool into one of those two directories, rerunning your terminal, closing it or sourcing your .profile. And now we don't have an alias to Fabric. and the Fabric tool is neatly tucked away further into our file system. Again, to use Ranger, one of the reasons you're going to learn Ranger is because of how easy it makes to just zip around your file system. So we created the bin. Again, this is looking up here. We see that we're in /home/newbie, which being the user account, this is our user home directory. Being in there, we created the bin. We didn't put anything in it, but we created the bin. So any binaries or executables that we have that if we put them in bin, they're going to be callable system wide. And likewise, following modern conventions, I guess, from what I've read, .local bin is where we put the Fabric tool, and now we can use it anywhere we are in the system. If we go into .config and drop out, we're now in the .config directory, and we can call the Fabric tool. We can call it from wherever. I know that was kind of a long drawn out thing, but I really wanted to show you the nuanced install of the binary, putting that executable into our system's path easily. We didn't have to insert any folders into our path that we otherwise normally would. We just created two bins that the system is already looking for, and if we bring them into existence, they're automatically, without us doing anything else other than the make dir bin command in two places, those two folders are automatically by our system inserted into the path. And so it's just a useful thing. I wish someone had told me that, a long time ago. Oh my God. So it's just a useful thing to know. And it's a way to keep your system neat. It's a way to start becoming a power user, or a terminal user at all to begin with. But especially if you start becoming a power user, you're going to really use those user specific bins for binaries and executables. The next thing we're going to go over is building the tool using go build, and then the third way to install is to clone the GitHub repo, and that you're generally, unless you're going to tweak the code, if you know Go, you're probably not watching these videos, but you do want to clone the repo if you want to use the GUIs, and we'll get into that down the road. I'll just clean things up in the system and get ready for the next video, and we'll see you over there.